Good morning. Welcome to the Leadership Matters conversations this morning. We have a special treat for you today. Dr. Hannah Barham-Brown will be leading our conversation today. As you can hear, more and more people are being admitted into the room. So can I please ask that everybody just be patient for a little bit while longer? I'd like to welcome all 57 colleagues to this session today. So my name is Diana Belfon and I am the EDI Specialist for Integrated Care Northamptonshire. Today we will be joined by two facilitators, myself and my colleague Natasha. We will be facilitating the session, so we'll be looking at all your questions and answers, etc. But can I just say that before we start the session, we've got some housekeeping rules. So Natasha, can you just go to the housekeeping slides, please? Right, so our housekeeping rules for today is that please keep your cameras on. I can see those good looking people out there, so it's really good to see those smiling faces. So please keep the cameras on today. It's always good for our speaker to see who they're speaking to. This is an interactive session, so we do welcome your questions. So you can do the questions by raising the hand function within Teams, or alternatively, if you feel a bit shy, that's not a problem. Pop your questions in the chat and Natasha and myself will raise those questions for you. Now, today's session will be recorded. Now, all we ask of you is to be mindful that you need to keep your microphones on mute. This is to eliminate any background noise so that when our colleagues watch this session again on demand, then there will be no distortion. Now, if you are hard of hearing, just like myself, within Teams at the top of the screen, you will see three small buttons, three small dots. Now you can click on those dots to enable the transcription mode. We would ask you to be mindful that today is a professional session, so we would like you to maintain your professionalism and be courteous when answering questions and interacting with our colleagues here today. Now that's enough from me. What I'd like to do now is hand you over to the chairperson for the day. So if we can go through to the next slide, please, Natasha. Now, your chairperson today is Tracy Robson. Can I just ask colleagues to keep their microphones on mute, please? Thank you. Your chairperson today is Tracy Robson, and Tracy is the HR Director at Northampton General Hospital. But also, Tracy is the Senior Responsible Officer for EDI and Organisational Development, which comes under the banner of Inclusive Culture Leadership. So I'm going to hand you over to Tracy to introduce our esteemed speaker, the wonderful Dr. Hannah Brown.
Thank you, Diana. And yes, I'm truly honoured to be doing that. But first of all, thank you. I can see we've got 74 people who are with us today for this really important discussion. Just a reminder of how this is titled. See me first. Disability does not mean inability. And I think the opportunity for all of us today, really, with having someone like Hannah, I'll give you a bit of background on her in a moment, is to take the opportunity to ask some questions, have a bit of discussion. Diana's explained there's a number of ways you can do that. So my ask is that you make the most of this opportunity to have this very special time with somebody like Hannah, who I'm now going to introduce. And when I was reading the bio, I was thinking, my goodness me, where do I even start in this space? So I'm really honoured and really excited to introduce Hannah Barham-Brown, and I am looking over here to make sure that I call out some things that I do not want to miss. So not only is Hannah a GP registrar in the wonderful Yorkshire, She's a governor of the Motability Foundation and former deputy leader of the UK Women's Equality Party. And she is the first visibly disabled political party deputy leader in UK history. Phenomenal. But it doesn't stop there. So in addition, alongside her clinical and political work, she manages to find time to travel the world so she can share her insights and her knowledge and experience around the world, talking about diversity, sexuality and disability. And she's also in regular demand as a columnist for a variety of publications, The Guardian, Mirror, Times, Redbox, Metro and Yorkshire Post, giving that local input as well, which is marvellous. But she's also given 2 TED Talks, and I don't know if you're a bit like me, but that is a real ambition to be there talking about something as a knowledge speaker. So we are truly honoured for you to give us some of your time, Hannah, today. It is greatly appreciated. But she's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and works to support disabled people in politics, employment, travel, health and education. And there's so much more. If you want to look up the bio of this wonderful woman, please do. So I'm going to be quiet now because we need to hear from you, Hannah, and hand to you for you to start this conversation.
Gosh, thank you. Thank you, Tracy, Diana and Natasha. It's really, really lovely to be here with so many of you today. Yeah, it's a great honour. So thank you for having me. So I'm going to start off with a visual descriptor of myself for anyone who might benefit from that. I'm a white woman with short, quite messy, vaguely red, curly hair. I'm wearing red glasses and a very thick fleece because today it is quite nippy up in Yorkshire and I've just given up and put on the heating for the first time. And if that doesn't tell you how hard I am, nothing's going to. My pronouns that I use are she, her. And what you can't see about me is that I am generally one of these. I spend a lot of time in a wheelchair. For those of you who might benefit, I'm holding up a wheelchair Barbie. They don't do them in scrubs yet, but I'm going to make that happen. Because I think it's really important that when we are interacting with people online, we often don't see visibilities that are normally very visible. And of course, many of us also have invisible disabilities, which I'm going to talk to you a bit about today. So, as Tracy's outlined, I have quite a few random hats that I like to wear. I've spent a lot of time working in health. I've been a nurse, I've worked in NHS HR. So Tracy, I appreciate everything you do. And now I've spent the last 7 years being a doctor. But also I'm very interested in the way that the charity sector works, third sector organisations work. And now I spend a lot of time going out and talking to very big, exciting, slightly intimidating companies about how they can be more inclusive and how they can consider diversity and why it doesn't need to be A, a really big scary thing that people always get wrong, or B, something that everyone feels that they should do, but they're really bored of talking about by now. Because I feel a lot of us sit there going, right, well, we've done our mandatory training for the year, box ticked, let's get on with the job. And it's all about trying to put all those conversations into our daily work. So hopefully what I'm going to talk to you about today may inspire you to go out into the wide world and see EDI and everything we talk about as being a bit more than that mandatory yearly tick box training, which we all know and love. I'm really good at using the right bin, I can tell you. So how I'm going to try and run this is we're going to have a big old Q&A session at the end because I really want to hear from you, and I think it's really important that you guys have the opportunity to ask me questions that you might not always feel comfortable asking a random disabled person that you meet in the street, because that's not always appropriate. And we can talk about a recent campaign that came out around that. I like to run these as what I call a judgment-free zone. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you off if you get the language wrong. I might gently correct you so you don't make that mistake again, but I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to tell you off. If we can try and anonymize things as best we can, I'm very happy to do that because I want you guys to have the opportunities. I think one of the big challenges we face as disabled people and people from minoritized groups is not that people don't want to talk to us, not that people don't want to engage with us. It's just they're scared of getting it wrong. And I know so often, you know, I can be rolling down the street and people will kind of not know whether to make eye contact with me. Do I smile at the poor disabled girl? I'll be in Sainsbury's and people will just stand there next to me going, do I offer to reach stuff for her? Like, what's the etiquette here? So I'm going to try and give you a space to ask some questions that you might not always get. So it's our judgment-free zone. Feel free to start putting questions in the box. So I've already mentioned that I have the funky wheelchair, if not the scrubs. As I say, I'm working on it. But what I haven't told you is that I also have an invisible disability. I have ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is probably the most inappropriately named syndrome. I don't see myself as having an attention deficit. I'm very good at paying attention to things. They just have to be things I give a flying crap about. And if they don't, then my brain is just not going to be excited by them. But if it is something I'm fascinated by, I will not be able to stop thinking about it, and I will become a world authority on it within about an hour. So I have that. I was diagnosed, and I'll tell you a little bit about my root diagnosis. But I'm really keen this conversation isn't all about disability, because none of us live in a silo. I am not just a disabled woman. So I think I kind of have to talk about the fact that I am a woman working in what has traditionally been a very male, patriarchal career. I am also a queer woman working in what isn't always the most welcoming of communities for queer people. I'm going to talk to you a bit about my career and my workplace experiences as a queer, disabled, neurodivergent woman. I'm going to try and cover a bit about reasonable adjustments, because I know that that's something everybody always kind of gets a bit squeaky about, and we don't really know what that means. Because the law is terrible. I'm going to ask very gently if people can make sure their microphones are muted. That'd be great. Partly because if you start having a chat, my neurodivergent brain's going to want to listen in. So I'll end off just wandering off on one. See a squirrel, chase it. And I'm going to end with some book recommendations, because I spend a lot of time sitting in corners reading books. It's my happy place, and there are lots that I can share with you. I'm currently in the process of writing my own book. So if you need any good books on disability, I've got them, because I've probably read them all and terrified myself about how many great ones there are out there. So my route into medicine has been quite an interesting one, and my route into what is most definitely a portfolio career has been somewhat unexpected. Medicine was actually my third degree. I originally did English and theology with Arabic at Durham. I was going to be a war correspondent. I grew up non-disabled, and the only reason I'm not a war correspondent now is because my mother banned me, telling me that I would, and I quote, get shot and end up in a wheelchair. Now, the irony of this is not lost on me, because now I just have the wheelchair and I didn't have the war correspondent career. But I realised, having graduated with a BA in Combined Arts, that nobody really knows what you're meant to do with a BA in Combined Arts. And around the same time I was finishing that degree, my youngest brother, Theo, was born. My father is a priest. My mother gave birth when I was 21. Theo was clearly divine conception, and I am not hearing anything else other than that. Okay. But Theo was born when I was 21, and Theo was significantly disabled. He had Down syndrome and spent the first 12 weeks of his life in intensive care in Addenbrooke's in Cambridge. And whilst my family had spent a lot of time in and out of hospitals, I think that was the first time I truly understood the really holistic nature of the care that his professionals were giving him. So when we were in that neonatal care unit, they weren't just caring for this very vulnerable, very tiny, very, wobbly baby. They were caring for my mum, who was a 46-year-old wheelchair user who was trying to learn to breastfeed again. They were caring for me when I was doing my finals up in Durham and then trying to commute down to Cambridge every couple of days to see my very battered mother and my very tiny brother. They were looking after my other brothers and my dad, who were having to commute in about 45 minutes to see Theo every day. So there was a whole lot going on, and they were there for all of us. And that was the first time I think I properly acknowledged that amazing, holistic, family-centered care that doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals were giving. And I thought, oh, I'd quite like to do that. that sounds fun. I didn't have any science A-levels. I still do not have any science A-levels, which always terrifies my patients. I promise I did get through medical school. I passed my finals. Trust me, I checked 4 times. So I figured I would, having just completed my degree, go through clearing. I had a look at a few courses in health, and I managed to get into paediatric nursing through clearing in Northumberland, which is where my family moved up to. And that was great because in those days you got your tuition fees paid. So I was able to study and do the 37 hours a week of placement. I was able to help support my family who'd moved up there in caring for Theo because my mum has a number of disabilities and there was a lot going on at home. And this enabled me to do all that whilst getting a qualification. And the more I studied nursing, the more I loved it, the more I realised I kept wanting to learn more. I wanted to understand all the different conditions I was seeing to a really kind of weirdly deep and nuanced degree. And I eventually realised that I really needed to go to medical school and do that thing. So I did. Got in through, like there was a postgraduate course I did down at St George's, which is 4 years. You can do this massive 5-hour exam where they basically quiz you on A-level and first year university level sciences, none of which I'd actually studied formally. So I bought a whole load of textbooks and crammed my way through. That is where ADHD hyperfocus is a magical and wonderful thing, and I will not hear a word against it. So I got into medical school and I managed. The first year, you're learning a whole lot of science, and I lived in the library from about 8 a.m. till 11 p.m. every day. Didn't really leave. There was a point where I was found sleeping there, and they kind of told me I did actually need to go home, Hannah. And it was hard, but I loved it. I absolutely adored it. And I'd entered medical school. I was a very fit and healthy, in massive inverted commas, person. I'd obviously grown up with ADHD, but I had no idea. I just thought I was a bit crap at exams. But during my medical degree, my brother Gareth, who had had a heart transplant when he was 14 and I was 16, yeah, my family genetics are truly spectacular. Gareth became very ill 9 years after a transplant, and in the early hours of Boxing Day, in my penultimate year of medical school, Gareth sadly died. He developed sepsis and he went very quickly. And I did that terrible stereotypical medical thing where I went, well, that sucks. And I went back to work. That is not the way to deal with bereavement. Just FYI. As somebody who does a lot of work around grief now, that is not a healthy way to deal with bereavement if you can help it. But I did, I went back and I decided the way that I was going to try and process all this grief, I did have some insight, was that I was going to try and run a half marathon for the British Heart Foundation. Spoiler alert, I ordered my first one of these within a year. So I am, not the Barbie, the actual wheelchair. So I started running and I realised that my right kneecap would go all the way around the back of my leg whilst I was running. It would fully dislocate and just kind of keep going. And I'd always been that super bendy kid at school. I'd always been that like girl who'd done ballet and was doing the splits and all the funky tricks and stuff. And my joints were all starting to really play up. I was about 26, 27. And being very bloody minded, I decided I was going to keep running. I was going to get through this half marathon. I was going to raise a lot of money for the British Heart Foundation. It would all be fine. I don't generally give medical advice when I give talks, but I will advise you that if something starts dislocating when you're running, you should probably stop running and get that checked out. Just a top tip from somebody who somehow got a medical degree. Don't run on dislocating joints. I did. It was a rookie error. And by the end of that, I'd done the half marathon, but my joints were all really kicking off and nothing was properly recovering. My GP was kind of a bit, I don't know what's going on with you. And eventually, fortunately, I was in a lecture with a rheumatologist and it was a teaching session where they were teaching us about hands. And she was examining my hands for the class and she's kind of like doing all this stuff. And she's like, Hannah, your hands are really bendy. Like all of your joints are going in directions they probably shouldn't. It's like, yeah, my whole body's like that. And she's like, Do you have any joint problems? It's like, well, yeah, I just ran this half marathon and my kneecaps keep dislocating and now my hip's a bit funny and this shoulder isn't right and my GP doesn't really know what's going on, so I'm just taking lots of painkillers and I've just ordered my first walking stick. And at that point she said, right, you need to see a colleague of mine. I think you need to get this checked out now. And I did that very medical student thing. As a medical student, we diagnose ourselves with something weird and wonderful every single week. We are the world's biggest hypochondriacs because you cannot study that many terrifying syndromes and not convince yourself that you have one every week. So I did my Googling, proper research, honest, and I diagnosed myself with something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And I'm just saying, you can call me House because I was completely right. So Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a collagen disorder. And basically all of the collagen, which makes up a whole load of stuff in your body, it makes up your eyes, your guts, your skin, your tendons, bits of your muscles. All of mine is super stretchy. So my whole body basically does this. I thought that was normal. Nobody ever told me it wasn't. And so all of my bits and pieces do that. And it gets worse as you get older. And as a woman, all the hormones and stuff kick in. And I eventually saw this rheumatologist who said, yes, you do have that. Go forth, do some physio, keep taking the painkillers, get mobility aids as you need them. Have you tried Pilates? And thus EDS became a big part of my life. So I'd started medical school running half marathons and I graduated in a wheelchair 4 years later, which was decidedly not the plan. And at that point, I graduated in 2016. Always terrifies me to say that out loud because it feels like a very long time ago now. I became a doctor in 2016 and I'd never seen another doctor in a wheelchair. I didn't know whether doctors in a wheelchair were even a thing. And the more concerning part was nobody around me knew whether doctors in wheelchairs were a thing. So I, got my first F1 job, which is always quite terrifying. You turn up on your first day as a doctor, scared to prescribe paracetamol. And my first boss, very lovely lady, I got up to the ward and I had tried to tell the hospital that, there was somebody coming in on wheels. I got up to the ward and she looked at me and went, oh, nobody told me about that. I was like, oh, well, this is going to be awkward, isn't it? And we had to muddle through. We had to find a way of doing it. And of course, alongside all of that, I was trying to do a Foundation 1 job with undiagnosed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, I don't know whether any of you are medics, but I'm sure many of you have met medics and you've probably seen a few terrified, very exhausted junior doctors in your time. They're generally the ones that look like they haven't slept for a week and kind of constantly want to cry. So when you're at F1 particularly, you're constantly juggling lots of job priorities. There are lists kind of flying everywhere with little boxes you've got to colour in. You've got a bleep going multiple times a minute, trying to pull you off in different directions. And I was trying to juggle all of that with a brain that doesn't like to necessarily focus on multiple things at once, that really struggles with distraction. But I was also doing that with something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is a big part of ADHD. So one of the things with ADHD is you get this RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, where you're convinced that you're being rejected. You're convinced that everybody hates you, that it's the worst thing in the world, that you've messed something up again. And part of this is ADHD, part of this is growing up with ADHD, where the world tells you you're just a bit silly, you're not paying attention, you should try harder, and all of those narratives. And when you're doing a job that's incredibly hard, that's incredibly emotionally taxing, and it's your first day or your first year or your first month, whatever it may be, all of those feelings of I'm not good enough at this, I'm messing this up, I'm ruining this, I'm doing harm are really, really prevalent, but nobody ever speaks about it. And so I honestly found the first couple of years of medicine absolute undiluted hell. I hated it. I was the girl crying in the linen cupboard a lot until I started an A&E job. Suddenly, A&E was a magical place because I am somebody with ADHD who thrives in an emergency. If something goes wrong, if poo hits the fan, I am the woman that is there. I can go, right, emergency brain, clicks it in, goes absolutely fine. The rest of the world can carry on around me because my hyperfocus has kicked in and I am good. And that's quite useful in A&E, where there are, you know, emergencies coming at you left, right and centre. You need to be able to click into that. So suddenly I found that I was on fire in the workplace and I was thriving. The only problem with this is that my wonky body hated night shifts, hated complex rota patterns, could not recover, could not get moving. My gut gave up. I lost a huge amount of weight. It got to the stage where the nurses were like trying to slip me those fattening Fortisip drinks because the scrubs were falling off me. It was not a good look. But through all of the chaos and the nightmares of starting work as a doctor with multiple disabilities, I had to find, and I did find, ways of doing pretty much everything. And a lot of the time it was people that were making assumptions about what I could and couldn't do that were the biggest challenge to me. So I have had very lovely, very senior, very well-meaning people in the NHS as a whole go, oh, well, of course, Hannah, you never did like cardiac arrests or anything like that with your wheelchair, did you? And I had to sit there and go, well, I'm really sorry, Prof. So-and-so. But actually, I not only do cardiac arrests, I'm the first one there because I'm literally on wheels. And corridors, the hospitals involve a lot of long corridors. I'm very good at speeding down those, and I used to do wheelchair racing. So actually, not only do I do the cardiac arrests, but I'm the first one there. I'm jumping up and down on a chest before anybody else has got there. It terrifies the living bejesus out of everyone when they find an empty wheelchair and a woman jumping up and down on the chest of somebody who needs CPR, but I'm there. And it was constantly kind of facing these attitudes of, oh, well, you can't possibly do this. And, oh, well, we can't expect you to do that. And it was like people wanted to remind me that I was disabled when I was actually pretty aware of that. I was all over that. I knew I didn't need people to keep telling me. I needed people to just go, Hannah, what do you need? Because there are lots of challenges that come with disability, but assumptions are one of the biggest ones. And so people see somebody in a wheelchair and they assume I can't move my legs at all. I can. In fact, if I've had a few drinks and I don't feel pain, I'm the first on the dance floor. I shouldn't be, and I regret it for days afterwards, but I will be. And I can do a lot of these things, but people see wheelchair and people automatically put you in a box. They judge you on your very first appearances. And also people hear that there is a legal requirement under the Equality Act 2010, and I blooming love the Equality Act 2010, parts of it at least, that says that if you have a disability, you are legally entitled to reasonable adjustments in the workplace. So this is where we're going to get a little bit nerdy because we found one of my happy topics, and let's talk about what disability actually means, because I know from bitter experience there's a lot of anxiety. Firstly, the word disabled is not a bad word. I am not offended when somebody calls me disabled. I am. It's fine. And we'll talk about the social model of disability in a few minutes. But people get really anxious about using that label. And when we look at the Equality Act, which defines disability for us, it says that a disability is a physical or mental impairment that has a long-term impact on your ability to complete day-to-day tasks. I'm paraphrasing the legal language because we don't need more legal language at this time on a Tuesday morning. But that's the key thing. If you have a physical or mental impairment, and that's challenging language, but I will go into that, that impacts your day-to-day ability to work, then legally you have a disability and you are disabled. And that is something that particularly in the neurodivergent community, we really struggle with. And I meet a lot of people who say, yes, I have ADHD, but I'm not disabled. I said, well, legally you are. You don't have to use that term for yourself, because I'd never say you have to describe yourself as something, but you should know that with that label comes a whole load of legal entitlements that you might find really helpful. So far from being a bad thing, using that label can be really beneficial, and claiming it can be really important. But we need to talk about the social model of disability and what that means. So the social model of disability, we've got various models. We've got a medical model, which says your body as a disabled person is broken and we must fix you, which is a bit icky. And as a medic, I don't particularly like the medical model. I don't need fixing. I just do things differently. I'm okay with that. And then we have the social model, which was kind of thought up in the 1970s. I'm going to be honest, it was thought up by a lot of cis white men who had spinal cord injuries. So it's not perfect, it's not entirely representative, but it's probably the best model we have. The social model of disability says that I, as a disabled person, have an impairment. I have a physical impairment. That means I do things differently. My body works differently, or my brain works differently. But it is society that disables me by being designed as if I didn't exist. So society decided to put stairs in. I did not design stairs, okay? I never thought that was a good idea. But now I am faced with a society that has them everywhere and that leaves me stuck. When society designs things as if disabled people don't exist, or people with impairments don't exist, that disables us. That is what limits us day to day. And if we collectively could come together and start thinking about how our society is designed, how our society works, inclusively with disabled people, then people like me wouldn't really be disabled anymore, because everything would just work for us in the same way it works for everybody else. So there you go. That's your very quick run through the law around equality models. Nailed it. Boom, tick the box. So, reasonable adjustments. Now, this is where the law is an ass, okay? And I can say that because I'm quoting Shakespeare. So, the law is an ass because the word reasonable is very open to interpretation. And that can be really challenging as an employee. And frankly, it can be really challenging as an employer as well. What constitutes reasonable? Now, if I turn up and I say, nice to meet you, it's my first day at work, I'm not going to be coming in until you've put in a whole new lift, until you've knocked down that building and painted me a blue badge space, until you've done X, Y, and Z. That is arguably not reasonable. I can't really ask you to redesign the entire infrastructure for me on no notice. But we can sit down and have a conversation about how we can make things work. And trust me, if I, as the really angry lefty political type, can get my head around the fact that I don't need to demolish every building, I promise you it will be fine. We will always find a way around. The point of reasonable adjustments is not just to get a disabled person into the workplace or enable a disabled person to work. The point of reasonable adjustments is to enable the disabled person to do the best job they possibly can. Okay, it's to enable them to be as good at their job as everybody else around them is. Because I don't want to be employed as the token disabled person who we go, oh yeah, Hannah can't do that, so we just leave that. We could make it easier, we could make it work for her, but we just don't. I don't want to be that person. I want to be there saving lives. God, that sounded pretentious, didn't it? So it's really important to think about reasonable adjustments as a kind of ongoing conversation. And when I talk to people about this, I say, right, try and have a conversation before you start in the workplace, or when you first know that you're going to need some adjustments making. Start those conversations as early as you can, but see it as an ongoing conversation, because the reasonable adjustments job is never done. Jobs change, bodies change, new situations come up. And also, as a disabled person, it's not right to put the onus on me to know exactly what I'm doing at any given time. I roll into a new job every 4 to 6 months as a junior doctor, and I don't know what the requirements of me are going to be. I don't know how I'm going to work in a surgical theatre. I don't know how X, Y, and Z is going to work. So I can't tell you that. I've just seen a cat pop up on someone's screen that makes me so happy. Mine will turn up at some point. But it's not my responsibility to know exactly how a job is going to work for me. I need that to be an ongoing conversation, and I need to be able to come back to you in a couple of weeks' time and go, here are all the things I'm struggling with, or here are all the things I would like you to be able to change. Can we have a conversation about those? And maintaining that open line of dialogue throughout a person's career is really, really important. If you turn around and say, don't need to have this meeting, thank you, everything's fine, then fine. But allow people to have those conversations. So some examples of great reasonable adjustments I've seen. When I first started my job, you'll have probably seen on hospital wards, we have what used to be known as computers on wheels, until people realised that they were cows, and you can't really yell, where's the cow, across a ward. It stresses people out. You end up with huge HR issues. So we call it a workplace on wheels or a workstation on wheels. So it's a wow. Where's the wow? Far better. They're laptops on a big trolley that's kind of about up here. I'm sitting down. So yeah, kind of about this level. And you push it round, the ward round, and you do your typing at the end of each bed, which is fine if you're not also trying to push yourself in a manual wheelchair. I can push the wow or I can push me. And if I'm trying to do both, I've got one hand on a wheel, I'm going to go around in circles and we're not going to get very far. So it became quite clear that when it came to ward round, which is like an F1's big job, I couldn't really do it with that setup because I couldn't move the computer, and no consultant wants to be moving a computer around for me. That's not very practical. So I said, well, could we get me my own laptop? Because I have a lap available. So how about we just get me my own computer and then I can just wheel around and I will be my own workstation on wheels. Which eventually we did, having had lots of long conversations with their IT, who loved me by the end of it. And what we found was this reasonable adjustment, which they just made for me, all the other doctors got really jealous. And it turned out that it actually made me more efficient than any of the other doctors. Not because I was better at my job, though obviously, no, not because I was better at my job, but because every time as a junior doctor, you go onto a different ward, you answer a bleep, you go and find another patient, you've got to log out the computer you're in, you've then got to go to the other ward, you've got to find an available computer that doesn't have a big sign saying ward coordinator's computer, do not touch on pain of death on it. You've then got to log in, which takes at least 10 minutes of the spinning wheel of doom, because this is the NHS. And then you kind of sit there going, right, now I need to wait. Whereas I could just roll onto the ward with my laptop already set up and go, I'm so sorry, Mr. Bloggs, what seems to be the problem? Boom, win for the disabled woman. And so all of the other junior doctors were kind of like, actually, this would make us far more efficient. And as a result, they then took that and went, right, how can we get more workstations on wheels? How can we get better access? This has highlighted an issue that actually senior management hadn't really clocked was so much of a problem. And it allowed us to have that conversation, which benefited everybody, disabled or not, all because I had a lap. Very handy. Similarly, I like to go and have a tour around every new job, and it just gives me a chance a couple of weeks before I turn up to go, hi, yes, appreciate this is a very secure unit, but you've put all the keypads right up there and I can't actually reach them when I'm sitting down. So whilst I'm not saying get rid of the keypad, can we maybe bring it down to like Hannah level so I can type it in there? And they did. And it meant that when I turn up on my first day of a scary new job, I don't have to worry about whether I can get into the bloody building. And you would not believe how often I've struggled to get into the building. At one point, I went to do a job at a sexual health clinic. I was doing a visiting day. I'm really interested in sexual health and wellbeing. It's my fun little sideline. And I turned up and there were 2 flights of stairs, which was quite awkward as the doctor. So I couldn't do my day. And that isn't just a problem for me and very bloody embarrassing for me. What does that say about our sexual health provision for disabled people? What does that say about our attitude towards disabled people in terms of whether or not they're sexually active? Do we not think that disabled people have sex? Because I hate to break it to you, and I'm really sorry if this is a shock. We do. We really do. We very much enjoy it, just like everybody else. And I had to kind of sit there and go, what do you do in this part of London if a disabled person thinks they need any kind of sexual health assistance? They're just kind of like, well, they see their GP, because we know how easy it is to get appointments with GPs. I can say that because I am one, okay? We're very touchy about that at the moment. Anyway, so there are lots of issues around disability and health. And we have other bad examples. I've had jobs taken away from me on 48 hours notice because they've decided they couldn't accommodate me after I'd done a roll around. And all I got was an email saying, so sorry, we've realised we're not going to be able to accommodate Hannah on Wednesday. And I got the email on Monday morning. And the most upsetting part of that was that nobody could understand why I was upset. I was crying in my boss's office going, I've worked my backside off for a decade to get here. I am pretty good at what I do. And yet I've don't know whether I have a job on Wednesday. I don't know if I can feed my cats and pay my mortgage. Nobody's telling me what happens. And the only reason I'm in this situation is because I'm a wheelchair user. And nobody really got it. Everyone was just kind of like, it's fine, we'll sort something out. But nobody considered the emotional or mental impact of that on me as a disabled member of staff. I'm going to cheer up a bit now. So, as I said, no woman is an island, and I want to kind of touch on the elements of gender and sexuality and other characteristics that we don't always consider when we're talking about disability, because disabled people make up 16 million people in the UK. And I hate to break it to you, we are not a homogenous group. We don't all agree on everything. There will probably be some disabled people on this talk who are outraged at some of the things I've said. There will probably be some people who are listening going, I'm not disabled, or who've just realised that they may be. And that's a whole thing to get your head around. I'm really sorry. Feel free to reach out if you need a chat afterwards. When you start telling people the law around disability, a few people will often go, oh, welcome to the club. We have T-shirts. We actually do have T-shirts. There are loads. It's great. So my very first night at medical school, I was in the bar, shocker, and a guy came up to me, quite an attractive man. I was like, oh, this is going well. And he said, so, what do you want to do when you grow up? Which is how we all talk to each other at medical school, because we all think we're something like Grey's Anatomy. And I was like, oh, well, I'm really interested in paediatric plastic burn surgery, because I used to be a nurse. I'd done some paediatric plastic burn surgery. Well, I hadn't done the surgery, but I'd watched a lot. And that looked really cool. And I think it's really fascinating. And he's like, you want to be a plastic surgeon? So yeah, no, that's definitely what I was very much going to be a surgeon. And he said, yeah, but you know your kids will hate you. I was like, I don't have children. He's like, yeah, but you know, you'll have kids, then you'll have the surgical career, then you'll never see them, and yeah, they'll hate you. I was like, okay, let's take this. And what do you want to do when you grow up? He's like, oh, I'm gonna be an orthopod. Of course, he was going to be a bloody orthopedic surgeon. Sorry to any orthopedic surgeons going on in here. I'm sort of like, oh right, you want to be an orthopod, but you know your kids will hate you. And he didn't get it. Did not even cross his mind that there could be any kind of equivalence going on there. It's like, this tells me all I need to know about you. You are no longer attractive to me. Walk away, little boy. Walk away. So that was my very first night at medical school, and I mean, this was only like 2012. It wasn't the blooming dark ages. Like, what the hell was going on? And I'm practicing now in 2023. Oh gosh, it's 2023. And there are some quite scary statistics that have recently come out. I live in Yorkshire with my amazing female partner. I am a very openly queer woman. My clinic room is got quite a few rainbows. I've got some interesting book titles just to see if anyone's paying attention, like the Vagina Bible and Queer Sex and all that sort of stuff. And I have to come to terms with the fact that in the last 5 years, hate crime against the LGBTQ community has gone up 112%. I have to come to terms with the fact that violent hate crime against disabled people has gone up 27% in recent years, because that's what happens when you repeatedly tell everyone that we're benefit scroungers. And I'm also somebody who is neurodivergent. And I often say that actually, as a medic, it is harder to come out to my colleagues as being neurodivergent than it is to come out as being in a relationship with a woman. Because before I got my diagnosis, I had a very senior doctor go, don't be ridiculous, Hannah, you can't have ADHD. You have 4 bachelor's degrees. Well, that's awkward. I've had people going, how on earth can you be a doctor? Like, aren't you going to forget things and like mess things up? And like, that's really dangerous. No, I've got that bit nailed. I've been doing this a while. I have an amazing whiteboard I carry around. Like, I've got all the things I need. I'm just as good. But I have that kind of narrative thrown at me a lot as a doctor with ADHD. There's a lot of disbelief that I could even do this job. And yet when I got that ADHD diagnosis, it was a proper light bulb moment for me. So I was diagnosed 2 years ago via work, actually. As a GP trainer, you have to do 2 big exams. One of them is clinical, where you see lots of patients and they film you and they go, yes, you're very nice to people. And I passed that one with flying colours first time, because it turns out I quite like people. People, most of the time, quite like me. It was fine, not a problem. Talking for a living, I can do that. Then there's another one, which is a written exam that takes about 3.5 hours. If you get extra time for disability, I was in that room for 5 hours. And I failed my first attempt quite impressively. I really flunked that exam. I just hadn't really appreciated how hard it was going to be. My bad, didn't do enough prep. Second time I failed by 1 mark, 0.5%. Bear in mind, you have to pay £500 a time to sit this exam. It's not a cheap hobby, plus all the revision courses and all that kind of nonsense. So I've spent about £5,000 on GP exams in my time. And after that, there was fortunately a GP trainer who came up to me and said, Hannah, what we've found is that trainees who fail this exam tend to have an undiagnosed neurodivergent condition. Have you ever considered getting an assessment, as being a bit neurospicy, as we say in the trade? And I was like, well, I'm pretty sure I have ADHD, but to be honest, I've never really bothered to do anything about it. It's never been a problem. I don't really want that label because everyone says horrible things about it. And she's like, Hannah, get the assessment. So I did. Lo and behold, yes, every blooming box totally ticked. I have hyperactive and inattentive type, because high overachiever. And I got that label. But that also meant I was able to then go and get those medications. And I got through the exam, 4th attempt, but we got there. And so I got that diagnosis. But what I learned was it was so much more than a label. It was a whole explainer about my life up until that point, and why my brain worked the way I did, and why I had these feelings about myself, and why I found certain situations very tricky, and why I find it so much easier to talk to 80 odd people on a Zoom call, or give a talk, or go on Sky Breakfast on no notice to the nation chatting about something I've done 10 minutes research on. Not a problem. Put me in a social situation in a pub, I am terrified, abjectly terrified. I learned all of the reasons I was like that. And I learned that it wasn't a negative thing. It wasn't that I was a bad person. It wasn't that I was incapable. It was just that my brain worked differently, and that actually I could take elements of that and I could use it. As somebody who spent their entire life trying to judge other people's reactions to me, I am incredibly good at reading people. I'm incredibly empathetic. And that's actually quite a skill as a GP. That's quite useful, because you only get 7 minutes to meet a person and hear their most intimate secrets. Being able to read them very quickly is kind of handy. And actually, I think it makes me a better doctor in that way. But I needed that explainer. I needed that definition. But then when we come back to it, having said that it's always easier to come out as queer than it is as ADHD, in the NHS, that isn't necessarily the case anymore, because I'm constantly having to consider whether I am safe. So if a patient refers to my husband, because lots of them like to talk to you about your home life to make you feel a bit more human, if they refer to my husband, I have to make the judgment call on the spot as to whether or not I correct them, because I don't have one. I have a lady friend. She's great. Do I say that? Do I just smile and nod? Is that a safe space for me to do that? If a patient makes a homophobic comment, which I have heard, I work in a particularly challenging area. If I hear a homophobic comment, do I correct them? Do I put myself in the line of fire as a queer woman? These are the kind of conversations I'm having to have in my head all the time. These are the assessments I'm having to have in my head all the time. And I think I'm going to try and move to the Q&A section in a minute or two. But I think if you take anything from this, I want you to consider the fact that I am not the only one here who will have experienced misogyny in the workplace. We've only recently seen that horrific sexual harassment and abuse report that's come out of the NHS in surgery. I'm not the only one here who will have experienced negative narratives around neurodivergency, being a neurodivergent person. I'm not the only person here who will have experienced institutional ableism, or who will have had jobs taken away from them because they're disabled. I'm not the only one here who will have experienced homophobia in the workplace as a queer person. All of these are experiences that other people here will have had many times over, and they will have had more. They will have experienced racism in the NHS or other organisations. Many of us will have experienced what in the normal world we'd consider hate crimes during the course of our work. And as each other's colleagues, it's really important that we remember that we remember that there's this whole other world that our colleagues are going through that we're not necessarily talking about. If I told my boss every time a patient said something homophobic in front of me, I'd never get any bloody work done. You know, if I told my boss every time somebody felt the need to comment on my wheelchair and, you know, how inspiring I was or whatever nonsense it was, or sit there and ask me whether I can be a doctor and whether I'm a real doctor and whether I can prescribe drugs and that sort of SH1T. If I told somebody every time I experienced that in the workplace, I'd never get any work done. And that's the situation that many of you and your colleagues will be in that we don't think about. And when we talk about burnout and when we talk about, you know, being kind in the workplace, these are the kind of things we have to take into account, because we'll all at times have to be considering whether we are safe to come out, whether we are safe to be ourselves, whether we are safe to bring our whole self to work, as that phrase constantly is being bandied around. And I think if nothing else, if you remember nothing else from that talk, I want you to remember that. So next time you're interacting with somebody over a cup of tea, next time that, you know, Maureen from accounts just seems a bit more mardy than normal or doesn't want to give you that paperwork or is being a bit difficult, what are they experiencing? What's been going on behind the scenes? What have they had to put up with that morning? And to me, that's all that EDI work is. That's all that inclusion work really is at the core of it. It's just about acknowledging everybody else's experiences, and that all of us are going to have experiences that we don't necessarily feel able to talk about, or we don't have the time to talk about. And I think that's really important. If we can grasp that, if we can try and live our lives through the eyes of other people, then we've probably nailed it, because we start to acknowledge and we start to understand. So I said I was going to go till 11:20. I've gone till 11:24, which I'm kind of pleased about. I do have some book recommendations I'm going to throw at you, and I'm hoping this gives everyone a couple of minutes to get loads of questions in. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep talking at you, and that is a threat, not a promise. Okay, so book recs. I'm currently, as I say, researching a book, so I'm now reading a lot of books. This one is fantastic. It's by Lottie Jackson. It's called See Me Rolling. Yeah. See what she did there on disability. This book, I'm a bit sad because my working title is Role Models, ROLL. Thank you. I saw a smile, I'll take it. So yeah, I'm hoping it's not too similar. This, similarly phenomenal. You can tell I'm like researching at the moment because there are lots of paper tabs in each book. This is by Annabelle Soamimo, sorry. It's called Divided, Racism, Medicine, and Why We Need to Decolonize Healthcare. Annabelle is a sexual health doctor. It's incredible. It came out about a year ago. It's just come out in paperback. Get it. I was sent this free copy and I'm adoring it. It's amazing. It's so important. Being Human, spelled Heumann, The Unrepentant Memoir of a Disability Rights Activist. If you haven't heard of Judith Heumann died a couple of months ago. She is one of the mothers of the Americans with Disabilities Act. She is basically the queen of disability rights activism, and we love her. And this is the most incredible memoir. It's hilarious. She did like sit-ins at state capitals and all sorts of things and chained her wheelchair to stuff. And I want to be her when I grow up. The Authority Gap, Why Women Are Still Taken Less Seriously Than Men and What We Can Do About It, by Mary Ann Sieghart. Excellent. Rebel Bodies, which is a guide to the gender health gap revolution, by Sarah Graham. Declaration of Interest. I'm in it. Yeah. I don't get to say that about many books. It makes me really happy. And then finally, this one I love is called Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary, Resilient, Disabled Body, by Rebecca Tausig. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of reading material. There's also The View from Down Here by Lucy Webster, which came out about 2 weeks ago. And it's amazing. So have a look at that one as well. So hopefully those book recommendations have given you time to throw me some questions. So far away.
Well done there. I liked your tactic there. Very good. I assume we're going to get this reading list, because I wrote some down, but I'm not very fast. We can get that out, can't we?
Yeah, I'll email it over to Diana at the end.
So thank you, my goodness me, your articulation of describing a story, but I wrote a few things down that kind of resonated with me, and that whole thing about society disables me. If only we could talk and work together. I don't expect you to change your whole infrastructure, particularly in the NHS. However, there are things, and that example that you gave about they brought a laptop to you was just, you know, some things going through my own brain in terms of, you know, really starting to think. But anyway, I will perhaps ask mine later. I think we have some hands up, which is great. So, Rebecca, you're first and then Kirsty.
Hi everyone, hi Hannah, it's great to see you. I'm a big fan, so I'll do a bit of fangirling first. But as an NHS librarian, have you got, so I love the books obviously, have you got any recommendations for some sort of fiction type books, stories that have people, you know, characters in that might have, heaven forbid, neurodivergence, a disability, maybe the whole package? And if you haven't, could you write one, Hannah, where maybe a graphic novel with you in it, maybe, you know?
I mean,
thinking it could be
firstly,
good.
I'm currently pitching a fiction and a non-fiction book, so thank you for that, because the fiction involves a lot of neurodivergence. So it's good to know there's a market. I'll be telling a publisher. Yes, so the one that's immediately coming to my head is called Fight or Flight. I will try and remember the name of the author. I read it really recently, and it does involve some neurodivergence, but it also has a character with EDS in it, which I'd never seen before, and that character is queer. One of my friends sent it to me. I'm so like, did you just get them to write a book about me? Like, how did this happen? So yeah, Fight or Flight is a really good one. I'm gonna have my fiction shelf backs on to the non-fiction here. So what I'll do is I'll have a quick scoot around after this, and I'll send Diana some names, because I do have a few. But yeah, there needs to be more. There needs to be more representation of neurodivergence and disability in books in general. And we need to stop being kind of saintly characters. A lot of the time, whenever you see a disabled person in a book, it's like that kind of like Secret Garden type narrative where, you know, you have that token disabled boy who like helps her learn about herself and then dies. Yeah, we need a bit more nuance to disability in literature, I think. It's slowly coming through, but no, I will pull out some because I've definitely seen some recently, and I will send them to you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Very exciting. Kirsty.
Thank you. It was a really, really good presentation. I really enjoyed it. Got a bit of a rainbow family myself with various queer and disabled and ADHD across our collection.
Hey.
What I thought was interesting is how can we move to something that, at least in the health service, that our organisations are a bit more consistent about how they deal with differently abled people. Because my son has just moved into a role. He's got ADHD. He declared it at the outset in the interview, which I was a little nervous about. But actually, they were fantastic, and they have seen it as a positive, because when he gets hyper-focused, he's awesome. So that's been brilliant. But that wasn't in the health service. And yet recently, I had a member of staff that has got a neurodivergent condition. And we really struggled to get others to accept that I wanted to put in place some differences in her work patterns that allowed us to optimise and get the best out of her. I was a bit flabbergasted, because of all of the organisations to be in, it was as if we just didn't get it. And I wonder what we can do to help our health service to be more consistent around how do we help our staff to deliver their best.
Yes, thank you. It's so important, and it always baffles me to an extent how such a big organization can be so inconsistent across the board. Like, we all seem to work in silos, and I say that as somebody who works in a very small GP practice the majority of the time, where I have a very lovely boss who does also tend to say things like, oh, but everyone's a bit neurodivergent, Hannah, as I bang my head against a wall. Don't ever say that to a neurodivergent person. It doesn't go down well, and they end up with head injuries. So in terms of how we fix this, there's a lot of work to do. There's some great stuff going on. So we now have the yearly NHS Disability Summit, which is great. And I've been involved in that. That's how Diana and I first came across each other, actually, as I was a keynote at that many years ago. And that's really good in that it's bringing disabled staff together, but trying to get enough kind of employer input into those conversations is really challenging, because the risk is that it tends to be a bit of a shouting shop where all the disabled people go, this is rubbish, we need to fix this, or here are some examples of great practice, but we don't have the kind of senior provision there to bring it through. So I think there's a whole range of things we can do. There was a great report a few years ago, which, hands up, I contributed to, called Able to Excel, which was written by Lord Kevin Shinquin and Demos, the think tank, which looked about how we get disabled people at senior levels of organisations. Because one of the big challenges we have is I think of all of the CEOs of NHS trusts in the UK, we have one that's out as disabled. And I think that tells you the problem. We make up nearly 25% of the population, and yet we're massively underrepresented at the senior levels. So us disabled people at the lower levels can be here yelling as much as we like about what needs to change. But if we don't have that senior representation at higher levels, it's very hard to make that change happen. Because I don't mind when people don't know the answers. I'm never going to be cross at senior people for going, I just don't know how to do this, Hannah. I get cross when they don't ask. I get cross when they don't recognise that lack of knowledge and when they don't try and fix it. And if we can acknowledge that actually, as somebody without a disability, it's very hard to understand a disabled person's life experience and what they may need, and to try and pull that talent through to senior levels, if we can do that, we'll get things going better. So I think things like the Disability Summit, we need to keep pushing, but we need to get better representation at them from a senior management and employers as well. But we need to get senior management who have disabilities involved. And I think also we need like good examples, like what are good practice examples. So that's why when I try and do these talks, I talk about this is what's worked. This is how it's worked for other people as well who are non-disabled. It's made other people's lives better. Because I think if we can share those examples and share what works, that is so powerful, because people just need the answers and they need to understand why. And that's why I love coming and talking to networks like this, because I'm sort of like, yes, you now have no excuse for not knowing, at least to ask us, you know? So hopefully that helps. But yeah, there's a long way to go. I completely agree. It's not fixed yet.
Yeah, I mean, Hannah, I think that's a really important point just to pause on, because in that ED&I space, we know, don't we, having the right people at the right levels, the ability to, you know, help and support and make things happen. But I don't disagree with you. I think we're getting really into that space now of help me. I really don't know what I'm doing. And it's okay to say that. I think you've still got leaders thinking, I need to know this, I need to understand it. But as stories change culture, examples where things have worked is what we really need to start to pull through, so that we can share the learning, work on it together, and make things just. I think sometimes we overcomplicate things as well, by the way. You know, we can overboil a situation when actually, if I spoke to you and said, what are the things that might work, you go, well, all you need is that. You know, I think, I think there's really something in that. I'm doing a lousy job of sharing. Sarah, hello.
Oh,
Sarah,
hello.
Sorry.
Hello, sorry. I was just getting ADHD impatient and starting to type my question instead.
Yeah,
you know how hard it is to not speak. You like sort of have to put your hand over your mouth. Yeah, it's really tricky. I was wondering, what was the greatest life gain or life enhancement that you feel that you have in your life because of your disabilities, or your kind of part in the queer culture, or what's the greatest things that those and the intersectionality of those have brought to you?
It's the communities. Like, I mean, you know, it's okay to say that sometimes being disabled is royally pants. And, you know, we can be disability proud and still go, you know what, I'm still really cheesed off that I'm stuck in bed today, or my brain is working a million miles an hour, or I'm convinced myself that everyone hates me. You know, that sucks. And it's okay to say that. But I think the thing that I've gained so much from being disabled, like that kind of empathy, that experience, the opportunity to come do stuff like this. Like, people wouldn't ask me to do stuff like this if I was a non-disabled person, because that would be entirely inappropriate. But I think the community around me has been life-changing. I have a network of disabled people who I can message instantly and go, I got left on a train and it was crap, or I got left in a hotel and there was a fire alarm at 1:30 in the morning and they left me to burn to death and then gaslit me into thinking it was my own fault. Hi, Premier Inn, don't stay there. You know, I can like phone people and go, this has happened, and they get it. And the power of that, you know, I'm going to say this, I'm an ex-trade unionist, but like the power of that community, the power of that union, the power of that connection, and people who get it, both as a queer person and as a neurodivergent person and as a physically disabled person, that's incredibly helpful, because we're constantly faced with so much awfulness in the world, you know, homophobia, ableism, racism, all of these things, and having people who get it around you, who you can say, it's not me, I'm not gaslighting myself here, it is awful, isn't it? And they just go, yeah, Hannah, it's awful, how do we come together and fix it? You're like, okay, let's fix it, let's do it. That just helps to turn the whole narrative around. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that community. They're my biggest win. Don't tell them though, it'll just go to their heads. Like, yeah.
100%.
Is that okay, Sarah? Thank you.
Yes, it's great to meet someone who I share so much experience with, and just to hear all of the things that you've kind of done with that and all the places it's taken you. It's fab.
Thanks.
Connectivity, so important with people who get it, whatever. I think that's fundamental. Really good point. Kirsty, over to you.
This is more of a selfish question. Did you find it beneficial understanding that you'd got ADHD as opposed to just suspecting it? Basically, as we went through the process with my son a couple of years ago, everyone kept turning around and saying, but isn't he rather like you? And it did sort of raise a question, and my son keeps saying, you've got it, Mum. But I mean, digital, it's kind of expected.
So yes, in short, I did. I'm really glad I got the diagnosis. Hilariously, since I got my diagnosis, my brother's been diagnosed, and both my parents are trying to blame each other because it's very heavily genetic. And I'm kind of like, no, we're all just like this, guys. This is all of us. We all have this. No, I found it incredibly helpful, and I think it gave me the permission to work out how I could make things better for myself, without spending most of the time blaming myself for working in that way. I could just sit there going, no, this is an actual thing. And actually, if we look at the social model of disability again, everything is set up against me. So all I need to do is try and figure out workarounds for that in the same way I've done with my physical disability, and stop making it about me, because shockingly, it isn't all about me all the time. But, you know, trying to think of things that way and going, actually, no, I need to just give myself permission to do what I can to make this work for me, became really helpful, and getting the diagnosis gave me that. It also gave me access to the medications that I desperately needed to get through an exam. So, you know, having that as an option. I'm not on the meds anymore, which is quite a fortunate thing, because there's currently a massive shortage. But, you know, having all of those options open up to me, and again, having that community of neurodivergent people around me going, no, this is very normal, has really helped hugely. So for me, it was a great thing to do, but I think it's a very personal journey, and it depends how you think you're going to respond to that and what you think you're going to get out of it. And if it's not going to benefit you, if it's just going to make you have a whole kind of identity crisis, then maybe it isn't something that you want or need to do. But I think you need to consider, how it could potentially be of benefit. And if you think it might be, then seek a diagnosis. You can always turn around and go, actually, I don't want to know anything more about this. I'm putting it in a box. I don't need to tell anyone. That's fine. You don't have to be like a neurodivergent poster girl like some of us have chosen to be.
I think it's really interesting, because certainly I felt that my son, once he'd received his diagnosis, he felt so much happier in his own skin, because he felt it helped him to understand he'd always felt a bit different, and now he was.
Definitely.
But I guess I haven't got that same driver, but I'm curious.
Yeah. And that's going to be research.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think I was talking to somebody else in the same field of work as me, that wonderful world of HR that you seem to have some in.
Love it.
Well, most of you have some experience of one way, shape or another, but there does seem to be, which I think is a really good thing. And I like you, Paul, my son, is in the same space where young people are really, I think, generally struggling with identity and who they are. And it's really good advice. And saying, you know, why am I having these challenges? But also I'm seeing a lot of, because clearly there's been a lot of, you know, celebrities, etc., all that stuff that have talked about it. And we're seeing a bit of a swell of people needing to know, so they can help people around them. I think it's really interesting, your response though, Hannah. I don't want to take away time for other people who've got questions, but you know, in terms of when you get that information, what you do with that, and then how you might get supported, could go perhaps one way or not for people. I think that's a really interesting insight, actually. Paula, over to you.
Yes, hello. Katie, I'm in the same boat as you, actually. I have a rainbow family. Also, I can see ADHD through my family, through generations. As daughters on the pathway, I don't need to be, but I really liked your question. That wasn't what I was putting my hand up for. I wanted to talk about reasonable adjustments, Hannah, and the fact that even in the NHS, there are lots of jobs that are full-time and there's no wavering on those full-time jobs. And I just wonder in the workplace, I think that we are not designed to be working for the machine full-time, on. I think we generated that through industry, from the Industrial Revolution. And I think now we're at a point where more kindness, more gentleness, the way that we work, I think needs to come through. And I know that there's going to be a big shift at some point, probably not in my lifetime. But I wonder with the Equality Act and the reasonable adjustments, whether how much we can push that with saying, well, actually, should you be advertising full-time jobs? And then when you do question it, or you support your child to question it because they can't work full-time because of their disabilities, that actually how do we shift that? That's concern.
So there has been some improvement. So one of the random hats I once wore was I worked on the Gender Pay Gap in Medicine review that came out a few years ago with Professor Dame Jane Dacre, I should say now. And that was a fascinating piece of work. So we looked a lot at kind of full-time working, because obviously if you want to talk about the gender pay gap, you have to talk about the fact that women take on 75% of the unpaid care burden in the UK, and that makes it very difficult to work full-time. And as a result, you end up with a kind of long-term massive pay gap, and how we kind of address that sort of thing. Now, flexi working in the NHS, my understanding, and I'm hoping Tracy will correct me if I'm wrong here, is that basically all jobs in the NHS are now advertised as, firstly, if you have a disability and you hit the minimum criteria, you can request an automatic interview. So you should automatically get interviewed for those jobs. That is my understanding from certainly looking on NHS jobs and stuff. I think that's quite a relatively new change in the last couple of years, in fairness. And it's not necessarily going back on jobs, but also that flexi working is something that should be mentioned in basically all job adverts now. So as we go forwards, we should find that there's massive improvements in this, because frankly, we look at the fact that, you know, there's lots of people who are struggling potentially to get work, and there are lots of people who would love to work less and potentially take the pay cut. You know, I work 60%, so I work effectively 3 days a week. And I've said many times that even if I wasn't disabled in any way, I would be wanting to do that. Because despite working 60%, I had a massive episode of burnout at the end of last year and was off work for a few months. My father got terminal cancer. It was all very dramatic. But the reason I couldn't keep working was because the nature of my work and the stress and the fact I'd worked through a pandemic and I dealt with all of this. I had to take some time out. And if I hadn't been able to return at 60%, I wouldn't have returned. And so I think we do need to acknowledge the nature of the work we do, and the fact that flexi working is so vitally important. Even if you don't have childcare responsibilities, even if you don't have a disability, even if, you know what, you just want to spend the other 40% of what would be your working life sitting in a cabin reading books. If you can afford to do that and that is your choice, fine. as far as I'm concerned, absolutely fine, because we get better out of people. And there's loads of studies, if you look over, particularly into like Scandinavian countries, about, you know, the 4-day working week and how actually you maintain productivity if everyone works one less day a week. You know, there's so much really good research going on in this area. But I think particularly in the UK, we really struggle with this as a concept. And I think, again, we have to look at the people who are at the senior levels making these decisions, because I don't think many of them worry on an hourly basis about who's going to pick up the kids from childcare if they get sick. Like, we have to acknowledge the representation element. We're getting better. Please don't get me wrong. We are definitely getting better. But I think if you look at kind of industries as a whole, and I'm not talking about the NHS specifically here, because shockingly, we are better than some. We do have to acknowledge that unless we, again, get those voices that understand this stuff at the top levels, we're never going to change the system below for other people. So it all kind of comes back to that for me. But it is difficult. We are getting better. I think the thing we do is we advocate. You know, I spent a lot of time working for the BMA, so I am very much about saying, you know, get together with your unions, get your colleagues together and say, actually, this is something we need. This is something that we're collectively struggling with, because it's very hard as an individual employee to make change happen. Whereas if you can get a few of you going, this is bonkers, we're all broken and burnt out and we're all going to go off on sick. And I see a lot of NHS workers who come in going, I should have gone off sick, you know, a month ago, but there were already so many of us off sick that I was taking over everybody else's workloads, and now I'm sick and I can't do it anymore. And it just becomes this self-perpetuating cycle. I see these people in clinic every single day because I work in an area that has a lot of hospital staff in it. We know that it doesn't work. We know the current system doesn't work, and we know that it needs to be better, and there's a long way to go. But I think we make it better by coming together and having these conversations and saying, hi, this is a problem. How do we fix it? Because I can't pretend to have all the answers myself, as much as I might like to think I do.
Thank you. That's really good. Thank you. We do still have work to do, but yes, you're right. Thank you.
This is one of my passionate. So I'm going to. This is the solution to so many things, and the thing I absolutely advocate for, just in Tracy's world and a sphere of influence, is it does not matter what your reason is. It's whether you have childcare, whether you're a carer, whether you just want to go to the gym. The world has changed in the NHS. I mean, look what we did in the pandemic. So I was actually brought in from private sector to sort of lead some work in this space, and then COVID hit and suddenly everybody was sent home. Almost a mercurial change from being present to being home. So this is something we need to hang on to and advocate for. And I think, Hannah, your point about senior leaders, and I really agree with you. I can think of a couple of senior people who need flexibility and agile working because they also are getting to points in their lives, by the way, me included, because I'm that sandwich generation where I had kids very late and I've got my mother. So it doesn't matter what your issue is. We just need to get, and I think the challenge is resource, financially constrained environment, managers need support to how to open up their thinking on this. Anyway, I'm going to be quiet because it really is a passionate thing of mine. Amanda, and after Amanda, if it's okay with Christine and Dorian, who've really been brave to put their hands up, we do have Diane. There might be at least one question in chat because you've got so many questions coming, Hannah. And we have not many more minutes, so please,
okay,
Amanda.
I'll do quick fire.
Amanda.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you for sharing with us. It was very powerful sharing your journey and things, but I am quite the opposite in terms of my disability because I live with sickle cell disease.
Yep.
So it's sort of a hereditary, one of the oldest hereditary disease known to man. But it comes to the point where you are judged because you don't look disabled. You know, you're not walking you're not in a wheelchair, you're not walking with crutches. I'm not to that stage yet where the disease, yes, it's debilitating. Yes, it has a lot of ill effects internally. So yes, I am obese. Yes, I look well in myself. But holistically, the illness in itself takes that burden.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you have colleagues where they would say just sly remarks like, "Oh, your illness. Why are you nurse? I am a registered nurse. 21 years, 2000, I think I qualified. 2002, I qualified, and I had an extensive career in terms of nursing in various fields, in various positions, and going up the ladder. And then, the last sort of 3 years, I decided actually I do not want to be a matron. I do not want to be
Yep.
a sort of nurse leader, but I still like my profession. I still
Mhm.
enjoy what I do. But the other thing is that, as you quite rightly said, reasonable adjustments. And I had the biggest challenge in my career where there was the redeployment because of the challenges within COVID. My COVID age is 160. Okay.
Mhm.
Right. So my COVID age is 160. I've been having the repercussions of the illness internally. So that slowed me down physically. Clinically, I'm still sound, but then having that conversation with HR about redeployment and reassigning roles. And they're like, well, we'll redeploy you based on your sickness. Actually, I haven't had a formal sickness review in 3 years because I haven't been ill, but it's based on my disability. But they don't understand that the illness is a disability.
Yeah.
And you get to that point of, well, you either downgrade yourself and things like that. Thankfully, I have a new manager who really stood in the gap for me, tried to understand the disease, one, and two, actually, what should I say, embraced my experience and my skills. But within that, the organization, which is the NHS, do not understand certain illnesses.
Yeah.
And then they think, okay, we will pigeonhole you into sickness, but you
Mhm.
haven't been sick, you haven't been unwell. But then you have to advocate for yourself and fight for yourself when you're seeing colleagues that are having menopause and all these other issues that aren't sort of lifelong, in the sense that,
Yeah.
yes, it's a physiological change in the
Mhm.
in your body, yet you're seeing colleagues being more supported. It's a predominantly African Caribbean disease.
Yep.
So my religion, my gender orientation, my ethnicity, all of that is a minority, and oftentimes a disablement, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
And quite rightly you said, how do we then get to the point of advocating and then saying to yourself, do I fight this battle or do I just back off and
Yeah.
let them figure it out? But it's really heartbreaking because now, in the last 6 months, I started a peer support group in Northamptonshire County where people that are working in the NHS with the same illness aren't being supported or anything like that. But they're so scared
Mhm.
to what should I say, not advertise their disability, but disclose it because of the repercussions of being lazy, being a drug seeker, within the disease itself, the connotations of sickle cell, and
Yeah.
the prejudgment or the unconscious bias within that disease. It really is unfair, but then they are getting the backlash of being calling in sick. I am very privileged in the sense that I'm very mouthy and I will fight for myself.
Yeah.
And I have a good manager that will challenge HR and challenge whoever in authority on my behalf. But not many people have that
Yeah.
gumption to do it.
I
How
think
do we then get it right?
Yeah, I think you've made some excellent points, and I'm not going to expand on all of them because I know we've got less than 5 minutes left. But
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think like disabled networks and the peer support group, as you mentioned, is incredibly important because that is how we come together. That is how we share this and how we fight for change, and that's how we've done it. A lot of places have LGBT networks, disability networks, race networks now in the workplace, and they're vitally important. The one thing we need to be careful is that they're not just working in silos, and that there is communication between them because a lot of us fit into a lot of those different boxes boxes, and we've just got to acknowledge that. But yeah, no, I think thank you for contributing. That was really important to hear that, so thank you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Amanda, and hello, because we worked together on a recruitment campaign with some really interesting discussions. So I wouldn't mind picking that up with you, because, you know, we're in our trust. And this is exactly hearing how you're feeling and the response to things. And I've got to believe if you can find some solutions for people, you get that productivity. It works both ways.
Yeah.
So, you know, we need to open that conversation. But one of the questions, Hannah, was around networks. And was there a specific network, or is there one we need to even consider and think about that would really help? I know we've got to finish after this, and I know people have got their hands up. Maybe if you could pop your question in the chat, and we will get Hannah to respond to them, and then we can. But that's maybe what we need to think about next, is the type of network.
Yeah, I think definitely look into networks. Obviously, I don't know what's going on locally for you guys. I'm sure Diana will have a very good idea. But yeah, bringing people together is so powerful. And I think if you can do that, if you can find your tribe, your community, then that's the way to kind of make a lot of change happen, because it's very hard to do that as an individual. But collectively, you've got a lot more power.
So I'm so sorry. I know some of you were queuing, and I'm sure we could have talked for at least another hour, but Hannah, I think you can see from the response to the conversation, boy oh boy, have you opened up a really important conversation in this community. So thank you so much for taking some of your time. I have no idea, and one day I'd like a cup of coffee and to talk about how do you fit all that in with your drive and your determination.
That would be the wonky brain.
Amazing though.
Thank you.
But thank you so much. I think it's got a lot of us thinking. I hope it keeps a lot of us talking, because some of this is about, okay, so we've heard and we've taught, so what are we going to do? How can we help each other to really make some difference back in our own organisations? And thank you to Dan and Natasha as well, because this wouldn't have happened without you organising this and coordinating it. Diana, is there anything here that we need to call out in terms of the follow-up, or?
What I can say, first of all, just to say thank you, Hannah. You know I'm a big fan. We've known each other for a lot of years. But we finally got you here in Northamptonshire. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you won't be a stranger to us in the future. Thank you very much.
With me now, my love.
What we would like to say at this stage is that feedback is a gift. What we'd like you to do is to fill in, this is me addressing the audience, if you could fill in the feedback link. It's in the chat, but it will also be sent out to you sometime today or tomorrow. So please, having Hannah is such an inspiration, and I'm just lost for words, Hannah. Honestly, thank you for taking the time. And I really wish you and your parents well, because I know it's been a very difficult time for you. So what we'd like to do now is to close the session. Tracy, thank you for sharing. Thank you, Natasha, for supporting. But I think thank you to the audience for supporting this well-deserved Leadership Matters. Hannah is a living legend. She's a legend in also that you can be a leader. We see you first, Hannah. We don't see your disability. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody. Hope that's got you thinking for the rest of the day, and I'm sure we'll see each other soon. Thank you, Hannah. Lovely to meet you. See you again,
Thanks
maybe.
so much. Definitely.
Bye.
See you soon.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye, Dan.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.